Hi there everyone, this is Elke from Fossil Creek Nursery. We're gonna talk about conifers and what distinguishes the different types that you will frequently see or use here in the landscape. Often I have people come in saying, I want a pine tree, and then I go, do you really want a pine tree? Or do you want a spruce tree or some of the other ones? So we're going to talk about a little bit again what the different ones are, and we're going to start with the pines since we started with the pines. This big guy right here is an Austrian pine. If you look around town in Fort Collins, about 90%, I'm guessing, of all the pine trees that you see in town are probably Austrians. They're very popular here because they grow well and grow fast, so that is a great attribute. But what distinguishes a pine tree from the other conifers? So first look at it, you see that it has much longer needles on the twig. And the needles are all the way around the branch, so there is no flattening anywhere. It's fully populated. If you go into it, you see several years worth of needles. So this one grew a lot for 1 year. Then it grew not as much the second year, and last year, because it was stuck in this bucket here, it grew very little. So Austrian pines generally have about 3 years worth of needles on them, which means, again, the 3 sets here. Once the new flush comes out in the center, the needles will start browning up, and that's when people often panic and go, oh my God, what's wrong with my pine tree? Absolutely nothing. What happens in the center is they don't get enough light, and so when a needle is no longer productive, the tree will shed it. So again, these are Austrian pines. This here is a different version of a pine. It's part of the white pine family. If you look closer at it, it has these white lines in the needles, and the needles also are very soft. That's what makes the white pines distinguishes them from some of the others. But again, you can see the needles are longer, they're all the way around the twig, and it just has that white line down the center, which makes it very pettable. It's super soft. So the next group right here, blue spruces. So it's part of the general spruce family. The blue spruce, you can tell you touch that thing and you don't ever want to do that again, because they're probably the prickliest of all the spruces out there. There's Norway spruces. Often they're more used as a specialty evergreen that is, funky in shape or size. That's where you see them the most often in town. Again, most of the spruces that you see are blue spruces and some version of the blue spruces. So what makes a blue spruce, or a spruce in general, a spruce? If we look at this guy, the needles are all the way around the twig, and they tend to be prickly. Again, the blue spruces are the prickliest of them all. Super popular because who doesn't love something differently colored, i.e. blue, in their landscape? There are a multitude of cultivars of blue spruces that vary a little bit in their shape and size and all of those things. A regular blue spruce can have actually quite a bit of green in it as well, because if you go up into the woods, if you look at blue spruces, they don't all look exactly the same. So that's the spruce family. So the next group that you don't see that much of in town, because they like to live in the mountains at much higher elevation, and also on the north and east side where it's drier and wetter actually, where it's cooler and wetter, are firs. So the big thing about a fir, you touch that thing, the needles are not pokey. If you want to go really close, you will see that the tips of the needles are actually rounded. This guy is maybe not the best example, but they tend to not have needles on the underside of their twigs. So the needles tend to be a little bit flatter. This one here, just to make sure I get it right, is a Nordman. So that one has a little bit more rounded foliage, but there is a native one here in Colorado. It's the white fir. It has actually quite long needles, up to 1 inch long, and you can really see how they fan out from the side on the twigs. So again, these guys are a little bit more unusual in that they don't really prefer to grow in the Front Range. Another big group of conifers that are actually native here in the area and in the foothills are junipers. So juniper is probably the most hated evergreen ever because it was used extensively as foundation plantings in the 80s, well, probably start in 60s all the way 80s, 90s, and then they get big and take over the entire front of your house. So a lot of people just don't like them, and they tend to be not easy to touch either. They have kind of scaly, short little needles, and some of them at your tip here, they are nice and smooth. But if you go further inside, they are sticking out more, and therefore they're a little bit more prickly. Again, there is a native variety, actually a couple of native ones, but right here in Colorado, the Rocky Mountain juniper, it's the cousin to the eastern red cedar, very similar in its shape. It can be, maybe not as tall as the eastern red cedar, but a lot of them have been selected for different shapes and colors. So they are often now used in screenings. When you don't have a lot of space, you can squish these guys close to a fence or a property boundary, and then, you know, evergreen. These guys, in the winter, they change color a little bit. They take some of the chlorophyll, which is the green compound in leaves. They retract some of it and they change color to more of a rusty brownish color, but then they will blue up or green up again in the spring. You can trim these guys. Actually, I really want you to trim these guys because they can have long and skinny branches, and then we get our 2 feet of snow and this happens and they will never stand up properly again. So if you chop them back a little bit, the branches will be shorter and much more sturdy and withhold heavy snows better. So that's the junipers. This guy right here is an arborvitae. So you will see these in great abundance at the big box stores because they're fast growing, they're nice and green, they're not prickly at all. You can tell them by their kind of fan-shaped little twigs on their leaves. Now, these are great plants in the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, but that kind of by default means they don't like Colorado. These guys like their world moist. They're not adapted to the high intensity sun that we have here in the winter, and so they often brown up because they can't supply enough water up to into their foliage, and that's when they brown up in the winter, and you end up with this one side brown and the rest of it looks okay plant. You can do arborvitae. They again need a more moister environment and generally do better when they have some partial shade, because again, that intense sun that we have here at high elevation stresses these guys out. Yeah, and that is kind of a quick overview for the conifers that you will find at most nurseries. And so now you can walk in and say, I want a spruce when you want a spruce, and not say a pine. And with that, see you next time.